Welcome to a short video on how to measure something using the Vernier Caliper. The Vernier Caliper has metric and imperial measures, so we'll talk about both of those, and by the end, you'll be an expert. Let's start. Alright, let's have a look at the Vernier calipers that we use in our classroom. They're plastic, so please be careful. They do break, and let's look at the parts. Well, the first thing we want to look at is that there are a couple of ways to measure. The first way is in between these two gaps. For example, if you had a tube, you could put the two inside measures inside the tube and you could figure out what the diameter inside the tube is. If you wanted to figure out what the diameter is outside the tube, you would put the tube in between those. Now, if you're trying to measure inside something where you can't put the Vernier caliper, you can move it so that the end here is inside that object or measuring some kind of distance, and this distance is the same as this distance. So you'll be able to do three types of measurement. For the most part, we can look at a Vernier caliper just as a ruler for the first two ways we measure, and then the third hundredths measure is where we jump in and use a sliding scale. Alright, so let's look at the parts. First of all, you see that there is two types of measures. If you look on the bottom, you'll see that that's in centimeters and the smaller scale is in millimeters. And if you look at the top, it's in inches and it's broken down into 1/16 of an inch. So you have to know how many spots are in between. Here's where things get different. On a Vernier caliper, you have this sliding scale. Now, this sliding scale helps to give you a very accurate hundredths measurement. So let's say we were measuring something using a ruler. If we had a ruler, we could say something is 5.6 centimeters long. We can't really guess on a hundredth because we have no way of measuring it. With a Vernier caliper, we could say, well, it's 5.63 centimeters long. So this gives us another level of accuracy. We'll talk about imperial measure after a few slides because it is a bit more tricky. But for now, that's the basics. All right. Let's have a look at measuring using this picture of the Vernier caliper. So the first thing we're going to do is look for full centimeters, 3 full centimeters. Before the 0, there are 1, 2, 3, so let's count 1, 2, 3 full millimeters, so it's 3.3. And now let's look at the sliding scale. So let's look at one that doesn't work. 8 doesn't work because if you look at this line above 8, it's in between two spaces. 9 doesn't work, 5 doesn't work, 4 doesn't work, 3 looks pretty good. I'm sort of feeling 1. Look how 1 is straight up and down. So I'm going to go with 3.31 centimeters. And that's how you use a Vernier caliper. So let's measure an item using this Vernier caliper reading. Again, we're looking for 3 different measurements. What is the full centimeters? Well, 6 full centimeters. How many full millimeters do we have? 1, 2. So 2 full millimeters before the 0. Remember, not the edge of the caliper, but the 0. Now let's look and see which one lines up the best. 9 looks pretty good. I'm still looking, still looking. What do you guys see? I'm going to go with 9. So 6.29 centimeters. All right. Remember, you have to look for 3 things. How many full centimeters, how many full millimeters before the 0, and which sliding scale matches best with the line above it. So I'll give you a minute. When you're ready, pause this video, come back for the answer. All right, let me tell you what I got. I see 4 full centimeters, so it's 4. And if I count my millimeters, there's 4 full millimeters. And I had a quick check of the sliding scale, and I think 1 looks pretty good. So I'm going to go with 4.41 centimeters. All right, let's have a look at the same Vernier caliper, but from the perspective of the imperial system. So if we notice at the top of the scale, we have inches. So let's just see if we can find some. There's 1 inch, 2 inches, 3 inches, 4 inches, etc. We now want to look at how many divisions there are between 1 inch of measure. So if we look here, on the scale here between 0 and 1, we actually have 1 inch cut up into 1/16. So now we're taking a measure and we're saying, okay, this is our full inches, and this is the amount of 1/16 that we would have, And the last thing we want to notice is that this is cut up into 1/28. You're probably wondering where 1/28 is. Well, if you notice on the sliding scale, there are 8 divisions. And those 8 divisions, if you take 16 times 8, you get 128. So 128 is taking each one of these 16ths of an inch and cutting it up into 8, which of course I can't show you. But that's essentially where all those numbers come from. So now let's figure out what the actual measurement is for this. And then we're going to have to do some math. So, easy to see, it's 2 full inches. Then we have to figure out where the 0 slider is in terms of the 16th. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's 4/16. So it's 2 plus 4/16. And now we're going to look and see which one of the 8 numbers matches up best. Not looking easy to see here, but I'm going to go with 1. 0, 1, 2, 3. I think 3 looks pretty good. And that is plus 3 128. But if you multiply 16 by 8, you get 128. So we can have a common denominator. So 2 plus, so 8 times 4 is 32, plus 3 over 128. So this is actually 2 and 35 1/28. Another way to do it, as we've discussed in class, is to take the measurement in metric and then convert it into imperial. But sometimes on the provincial, they only give you the imperial measure to work with, so then you really have to know what you're talking about. All right, let's measure this one in imperial. So the first thing we're going to look for is full inches. Well, full inches is right here. It's 1 full inch, so that's 1. Now we're going to have to measure how many 16ths of an inch are there before the 0. Well, 1, 2, 3, 4, plus 4/16. And now we have to figure out on the sliding scale which number looks the best. Well, if you look right here, the 0 looks pretty good to me. So I'm going to have to say this is an actual just 1 1/4 inch. The nice thing when you're doing this measurement, if you're doing this with a ruler versus a Vernier caliper, is you can actually now say definitively that you have 0 1/28 of an inch rather than just guessing. So there you go. All right, so here's your final test. Go ahead and measure this in both metric and imperial. Stop the video before the answers appear and check your answers. All right, I'm assuming you have stopped the video and done the work, so let's see if we can figure this out. So let's start with imperial. So imperial measure, you can see 2 full inches. And then you can see 4/16. So that's our second, so we'll add those up. And then let's look for a sliding scale. What looks good? Not 0, not 1, not 2. I think 3 looks the best. So then it's 3 1/28. Keep in mind that we can get our common denominator by multiplying this and this by 8. So the way I do it, I just cheat. I do 8 times 4 is 32, plus 3 is 35. So I get 2 and 35 1/28. So that's my imperial measure. Metric, a little bit easier. All right, 5 full centimeters. And then my sliding scale 0 starts just after the 7, so 5.7. And then what looks good? Oh, it's a tricky one. Oh, 5 looks pretty good, so I'm going to go with 5. So 5.75 centimeters. All right, well, there you have it. There's how you use a Vernier caliper to measure something, and then how you read that and interpret it in both metric and imperial. And just one final note, when you're doing imperial measure in the textbook, please note that they have often 10 divisions in their inch rather than 16. So you'll have to do this out of 10, and I think the other one will be out of 1,000. So just keep that in mind. Or sometimes they're also in 40 and 25s. So just make sure you count how many are in the bottom and multiply it by the divisions in the top.